Interpersonal Communication, Velvery Tillman. Introduction. Interpersonal communication literally occurs between people regardless of where they are in the world. It allows individuals to create meanings as we figure out what each other's words and behaviors represent. The heart of interpersonal communication is shared meanings between people. Around 400 BC, Hippocrates classified temperament by a person's four different body fluids. First, blood was associated with a cheerful temperament, spleen with a calm temperament, black bile was associated with a depressed temperament, and yellow bile was associated with an irritable temperament. The four temperament model of human behavior involves the DISC profile. D representing active task-oriented, I active people-oriented, S passive people-oriented, and C passive task-oriented. The communication process. Behavior blend is any combination of the four types of temperaments that individuals express. Communication at its basic level was defined by Stewart using the metaphors inhaling and exhaling. Inhaling involves perception and listening. Exhaling deals with expressing and disclosing. Both terms allow us to maintain healthy relationships. Perception and stereotyping in the communication process. Perception is a social and cognitive process in which people assign meaning to sensory cues. There are three sub-processes of perception. First, selecting. Second, organizing. Third, inferring. Stereotyping is a preconceived and oversimplified idea of the characteristics which typify a person. There are two dimensions of stereotypes. They can be positive or negative. Stereotypes can also vary in intensity. Positive stereotypes are categorizations that evoke favorable association. An example would be Asians are good at math or African Americans are athletic. Negative stereotypes is an example of what we saw shortly after 9/11 when Arabs were labeled as terrorists. Totalizing and nexting in the communication process. Totalizing means thinking and acting as if a simple aspect of a person is the totality of that person. Nexting is when you have problems or challenges, you take the time to ask yourself the question, what can I help to happen next? Communication and emotions. The flat brain theory of emotion pictures what's happening inside us when things are going well and how they change when they are not. Flat brain syndrome occurs when expanding bellies push up through our bodies until the pressure hits our brains, flattening them against the top of our skulls. Flat brain tango is defending ourselves by hitting flat brain in the stomach, which flattens the brain even more and activates another round of defense. Methods for overcoming the flat brain syndrome include reducing emotional disturbance, clarifying thinking, increasing self-confidence, and building supportive relationships. Communication tools. Tools are important, and a good tool is the talker listening card. It can be placed between two people engaging in a dialogue that acts as a silent moderator. It's also referred to as a foldable third person. Heart Talk is another tool that puts openness and ownership into words. My favorite is the finger method. Communication method that allows you to point your finger and tell the difference between sharing and accusing. And you can often do this without being obvious. For example, I can point at my head and say, I think or I remember. I can point at my eyes or my ears and say, I saw or I heard. Or I can point at my stomach and say, I'm scared, irritated, or excited. Listening in the interpersonal communication. Listening is taking in information from speakers, other people, or ourselves while remaining non-judgmental and empathetic. Acknowledging the talker in a way that invites the communication to continue. A good listener can be defined as one who is mindful of the wide spectrum of listening skills. A good listener also remains unbiased, is a vital part of the communication, and validates what the other person is saying is important. Elements for dialogue. Effective listening often depends on what is going on in the head and heart of those communicating, rather than what is taking place on the outside. Verbal and nonverbal communication patterns may signal how mindful message senders or recipients are. Listener counselor. Characteristics of the listener counselor that influence growth in people include empathy, genuineness, and warmth. Overarching goal. My goal is to lead people that I encounter in the world I inhabit in a better condition as I live a life of Christ that is reflective of Jesus Christ. I am reminded that I am flawed and make mistakes, but the Holy Spirit affords me the opportunity to learn and grow to be all that I have been created to be and leave people and things better than I found them. One of my favorite quotes is that of Dr. King. He says, "If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the message as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain." Enlarging the conversation. Identity or self is made of interlocking features that mark how persons behave and respond to others. Human factor is also important in the conversation, as well as being the accountable self. Enlarging the conversation for me is where I do life. The text uses the term organizational life, and like I said, for me, this is what I refer to as the place where I do life. These are places where my relationships are formed, developed, and maintained. That occurs in my home, my family, church, and school. My voice and my body and my being are his temple, and I always want to be in tune with the Father. Doing life with others is not always perfect, and it may mean that I will blow it as I engage in dialogue with others. But the grace of God allows me to continue the journey. Background influences. I was born in rural Georgia in 1969, and based on what society defined for me, I was nothing and would never be anything. I was born to an unwed mother, and my father was not in the home, but what we did have was love and a lot of faith. My mother worked 2 jobs and constantly told my brother and I we could achieve anything or go anywhere with God on our side and hard work. We both excelled in high school and graduated from college. We're both living a life of Christ with our spouses and children. I'm so thankful that I do not have to let other people's dialogue write my story, but the journey has not been easy. Some positive impacts are persistence, goal-oriented, loving, and faithful. Negative impacts include difficult time respecting contradicting values, shame, and afraid of failure. Behavior blend. My personality trait is that of a DS, which is dominant and submissive. Barriers in my interpersonal contact. Not open and transparent, physical and mental fatigue, and the tendency to want to solve other people's problems. Solution to those barriers would be to exercise, eat healthy, and get the proper amount of rest, as well as decreasing my workload by delegating tasks to others. Noise pollution and solutions. There are internal and external noise pollutions. Biased listening is an internal noise, emotional listening, as well as hearing what you want to hear. External noises include room temperature, views of outside activity, interruptions, or time pressure. Action plan. In order to make my personal communication goals a reality, I would take Peterson's advice, which is in line with my life goal. Reduce emotional disturbance, clarify thinking, increase self-confidence, and build supportive relationships. First, live an authentic life that is rooted in Galatians 2:20. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself up for me. Secondly, reduce emotional disturbance. I will always refer back to the Bible for guidance. I have to live in a way that demonstrates I have no control and everything is in the Father's control. As I take on clinical tasks, I have to maintain a professional stance and not take on the challenges of others. Clarify thinking. I must be in tune with my feelings, thoughts, and actions as well as those of others. And the last, build supportive relationships. We have to build relationships in this life.